In this lesson, we will discuss risk management strategies. Once risks are identified and assessed, the next step is to decide how to treat or manage these risks. There are four primary risk management strategies, which are transfer, accept, avoid, and mitigate. First, we have risk transference, also known as risk sharing. Transferring a risk involves shifting the risk from the organization to another party. This is typically done through insurance or contract clauses. By far, insurance is the most common method of risk transference. When you purchase an insurance policy, you are transferring the risk of a potential loss to the insurance company in exchange for a fee, known as the premium. For example, if you own a business and you purchase liability insurance, you are transferring the risk of financial loss due to a lawsuit to the insurance company. If a lawsuit does occur, the insurance company will cover the financial loss up to the limit specified in the policy. Another common method of risk transfer is to use a contract indemnity clause. Contract indemnity clauses are another method of risk transference. An indemnity clause is a contractual agreement in which one party agrees to compensate the other for any harm, liability, or loss that arises out of the contract. For example, in a construction contract, the contractor might agree to indemnify the property owner for any damages that occur during the construction process. This means that if any damage does occur, the contractor, rather than the property owner, will be responsible for the financial loss. In both cases, the goal of risk transference is to shift the financial burden of a potential loss from one party to another. This can provide a sense of security and help to mitigate the potential impact of unforeseen events. However, it's important to note that risk transference does not eliminate the risk entirely. It simply shifts the responsibility for dealing with the financial consequences of the risk. While the material risk may shift, risk to the original party's reputation still remains. Second, we have risk acceptance. Accepting a risk means acknowledging the risk and deciding to deal with it if and when it occurs. This strategy is often used when the cost of managing the risk outweighs the potential loss or when the risk is unlikely to have a significant impact. Risk acceptance is a risk management strategy where a business or individual acknowledges that a certain risk exists and decides to accept it without taking any measures to mitigate it. This strategy is often used, again, when the cost of preventing the risk is greater than the potential loss or when the potential gain outweighs the potential loss. One method of conducting risk acceptance is through exemption. An exemption is a provision that excludes a party from a particular rule or requirement. This means that the party is not subject to the rule or requirement and therefore does not bear the risk associated with non-compliance. For example, in the context of financial regulation, certain small businesses might be exempt from certain reporting requirements. This means that these businesses accept the risk of operating without the protection offered by these reporting requirements, but they also are free from the administrative burden of compliance. Another method of conducting risk acceptance is through exception. An exception is a provision that allows a party to avoid a particular rule or requirement under specific circumstances. This means that the party is generally subject to the rule or requirement, but under certain conditions, they can avoid the associated risk. Another example, in the context of data protection regulation, there might be exceptions that allow businesses to process personal data without consent under specific circumstances. This means that these businesses accept the general risk of non-compliance with data protection regulations, but they can avoid the risk under specific conditions. In both cases, the party is accepting a certain level of risk either by operating outside of the protections offered by a particular rule or requirement in the case of exemption, or by operating under conditions that allow them to avoid the risk in the case of an exception. Third, we have risk avoidance. Avoiding a risk involves changing plans or strategies to eliminate the risk entirely. This is often the chosen strategy when the risk is too great to accept or transfer. For example, a company might avoid the risk of a lawsuit by deciding not to launch a product that could potentially infringe on another company's patent. Alternatively, a company might avoid the risk of operating in a politically unstable country by choosing to operate in a different market. And fourth, we have risk mitigation. Mitigating a risk involves taking steps to reduce the likelihood or impact of that risk. This is the most common risk management strategy and can involve a wide range of activities. For instance, a manufacturing company might mitigate the risk of workplace accidents by implementing rigorous safety training for all employees. A tech company might mitigate the risk of data breaches by investing in robust cybersecurity measures. So remember, risk transference is a strategy that involves shifting the risk of loss from one party to another, such as through insurance or contract indemnity clauses. Risk acceptance is a strategy where businesses or individuals acknowledge a risk and decide to accept it without taking any measures to mitigate it. Risk avoidance is a strategy that involves taking actions to completely avoid the risk. This could mean not engaging in certain activities or operations that could potentially lead to the risk. Risk mitigation involves taking steps to reduce the potential impact or likelihood of a risk. And this could involve implementing controls, safety measures, or other actions that would lessen the impact of the risk should it occur.